Tonight, Trump issues 10-15-day Iran nuclear ultimatum. Markets roil, gold spikes.
The warehouse door exploded inward at 4:47 a.m. Tactical teams moved through the darkness like ghosts, their boots silent on concrete, their weapons raised. The air hung thick with the smell of diesel fuel and something else, chemicals. Industrial quantities of precursor chemicals, cooking down into something that would devastate 500,000 lives before the year ended. This is the story of Operation Iron Gateway. What federal investigators discovered would make them question everything they thought they knew about power corruption, and how deep the rot could run in a single state. It began, as most things do, with a single suspicious shipment. 3 months earlier, a customs inspector named Marcus Chun had been doing his job. Routine inspections at the port of Houston. He flagged a shipping container, legitimate paperwork, all documents aligned perfectly. Too perfect. In his 15 years of work, Marcus had learned that legitimate shipments had small inconsistencies. A typo, a date format that varied, human error. This container had none of that. Inside were restaurant equipment, beautiful stainless steel, commercial-grade ovens, industrial mixers, massive stockpots. Enough equipment to outfit a 5-star kitchen. The problem was the destination, a small town called Millbrook, Texas, population 8,400, a rural community with exactly 0 fine dining establishments. Marcus flagged it. It sat in a DEA field office file for 6 weeks. Then a young analyst named Sarah Reeves pulled it one Tuesday morning and decided to pull the thread. One container led to 17 more. Same pattern, same shipment company, different routing addresses across rural Texas. When Sarah ran the addresses against property records, something emerged from the digital noise. They all connected back to shell companies. And those shell companies all traced to a single registered agent, a lawyer in Austin who died in a car accident 2 years prior. That's when Sarah called the FBI. 4:32 a.m. A pre-dawn darkness so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. In the warehouse district of Corpus Christi, Texas, teams from the FBI, DEA, and IC moved in synchronized precision. 12 simultaneous breaches. 12 locations. 12 teams ready to hit hard and fast. The first warehouse was where they found the superlab. SWAT breached the steel rolling doors with shape charges. Flashbangs detonated, brilliant white light that erased shadows and disoriented everyone inside. Agents in black tactical gear flowed through the opening like water finding cracks. 3 suspects tried to run toward a back exit. All 3 were tackled before they made it 10 feet. Inside, the scale was staggering. Rows of industrial cooking equipment lined the warehouse floor. Hundreds of pounds of fentanyl in various states of processing. Precursor chemicals in sealed drums. A separate room with pill pressing machines. State-of-the-art equipment capable of producing 50,000 fentanyl pills per hour. On the walls, handwritten ledgers with dates, quantities, distribution routes. Numbers that made the agents stop and stare. In a locked office at the back, they found something else entirely. Encrypted hard drives. Military-grade encryption. The kind of security you don't see in drug operations run by street-level traffickers. This was corporate-level infrastructure. The second location was a mansion in the hill country outside Austin. They hit it at 4:40 a.m. The owner wasn't there, but his financial records were. 17 offshore accounts. Wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and the British Virgin Islands. Amounts so large they had their own accounting system. The third location was a human trafficking safe house in San Antonio. 32 migrants were found in the basement. Passports confiscated. Debts to the cartel that would take years of unpaid labor to repay. The operation wasn't just about drugs. It was about bodies, about control, about the systematic exploitation of the desperate. By 6:15 a.m., federal agents had seized 847 pounds of fentanyl, 340 pounds of cocaine, 1,200 pounds of methamphetamine, 2.1 million fentanyl pills, and $23 million in cash. They'd arrested 43 suspects, and they'd barely scratched the surface. The real discovery came later that morning, in a server room beneath the Corpus Christi warehouse, hidden behind a false wall, protected by layers of encryption that would take the FBI's cyber team 6 hours to crack. What they found changed everything. The FBI Cyber Forensics Lab in Houston was quiet at 2:15 p.m. when Special Agent David Morrison first saw the network diagram. It materialized across his screen in layers. Not a drug cartel in the traditional sense. This was something far more sophisticated. A shell company infrastructure so complex it had taken the team 3 hours just to map the first level. But once you saw the pattern, you couldn't unsee it. At the center of everything was a single encrypted communication node. The cyber team traced it backward through proxy servers, through VPNs, through encrypted messaging platforms. Every communication that moved through the system bore the same digital signature, the same authorization key, the same hand pulling the strings. The signature belonged to someone named Governor Marcus Ashford. The name hit the room like ice water. Marcus Ashford had been governor of Texas for 8 years. Before that, he'd been mayor of Austin. Before that, a state senator. He was a decorated public servant. He'd won humanitarian awards. He'd given commencement speeches about integrity and the rule of law. And according to the encrypted files they were now decrypting, he had turned the entire state into a cartel fortress. The evidence unfolded across screens like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Shell companies registered to his childhood friends. Offshore accounts connected through his brother-in-law. Border Patrol shift schedules altered on specific dates that matched exactly with cartel convoy movements. Way stations mysteriously closed for maintenance when drug trucks were scheduled to pass. Falsified patrol reports filed by state troopers whose bank accounts showed deposits of exactly $15,000 every 2 weeks. This wasn't corruption. That word was too small, too familiar. This was command-level infiltration. The entire law enforcement infrastructure of the state had been quietly repurposed into a logistics network for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG. One document showed a 10-year strategic plan. Handwritten notes from Governor Ashford outlined his vision, not just to allow cartel operations to flourish in Texas, but to restructure the state's governance around them, to turn Texas into the permanent continental headquarters for drug distribution across North America, to create what he called a second state within the state, operating under cartel protocols while maintaining the appearance of legitimate government. The numbers were horrifying. The network was moving 3.2 tons of narcotics per week across state lines. It was trafficking an estimated 1,500 migrants per month through smuggling corridors. It was generating approximately $4.8 billion annually in laundered cartel revenue through seemingly legitimate business operations. And it had been operating for 6 years without detection. 5 a.m. Next day, 22 hours after the first raids, a federal command center had been set up in a secure location in Dallas. The walls were covered with digital maps. Hundreds of red markers pulsed across the state like a contagion map. Each marker represented a location connected to the network. Each one was about to be hit simultaneously. Over 1,200 federal agents had been mobilized. FBI teams, DEA rapid response units, ICE teams, DHS Homeland Security investigations, state police working with the feds, SWAT teams from multiple jurisdictions, Black Hawk helicopters staged at 4 locations, armored vehicles positioned at key intersections. The operation had been codenamed Iron Gateway, and it was about to be executed. At 5:47 a.m., the order was given. Across the state, teams moved in perfect synchronization. 16 locations were hit in the first 5 minutes. A cartel superlab in an abandoned petrochemical plant near Beaumont. A money laundering operation disguised as a chain of restaurants running through Houston and Dallas. A human trafficking transit house in Laredo where migrants were held until their debts were settled. A drug distribution warehouse in Austin. A migrant smuggling coordination hub in El Paso, a financial processing center hidden in a commercial office building in San Antonio. The Beaumont Superlab went down hard. DEA agents found 400 pounds of fentanyl, processing equipment worth $3.2 million, and ledgers documenting every gram that had left the facility for the past 28 months. When they breached the hidden bunker beneath the structure, they found something else: ammunition, tactical vests, military-grade weapons, not for external defense, for internal security, for killing people who became liabilities. In Austin, federal agents hit a mansion belonging to cartel Lieutenant Victor Reyes. He tried to run. He made it 60 feet before a K-9 unit brought him down. In his safe, they found $47 million in cash, encrypted phones, and photographs. Photographs of him standing next to Governor Ashford. Photographs of Ashford standing next to cartel distributors. Photographs that documented years of direct collaboration. At the El Paso smuggling hub, agents found manifests. Not just lists of migrants being moved, but schedules. Pickup times, drop-off locations, border crossing times coordinated with specific shifts when fewer patrol agents would be working. The entire operation was choreographed like a military campaign. By 8:30 a.m., the initial wave was complete. The federal task force had arrested 247 suspects. They'd seized 2,100 pounds of fentanyl. They'd seized 1,800 pounds of cocaine. They'd seized 4,300 pounds of methamphetamine. They'd seized $89 million in cash. They'd rescued 312 trafficking victims. And they'd collected evidence that would reshape the entire investigation. The underworld had taken more damage in 3 hours than in the previous 6 years combined. But the real shock was still coming. FBI Special Agent Karen Torres sat in a secure conference room surrounded by seized servers and server logs. It was now 11:47 p.m. She hadn't slept in 38 hours. What she was looking at made sleep seem impossible anyway. The ledgers from Governor Ashford's inner circle documented payments. Systematic, organized, and meticulous. 43 state police officers on cartel payroll. 7 judges received monthly stipends ranging from $8,000 to $22,000. 2 U.S. Border Patrol supervisors. A state legislator. A county commissioner. A federal immigration officer. A state attorney general's investigator. It wasn't just corruption. It was an alternative security force. A parallel law enforcement structure that existed to protect cartel interests instead of serve public safety. When honest officers filed reports about suspicious activity, these compromised officials would intervene. When raids were scheduled, leaks would occur. When evidence was being collected, files would disappear. The betrayal cut deepest when they found the internal communications. Text messages between patrol sergeants discussing which migration interdiction operations should be allowed to succeed and which should be quietly undermined. Emails from judges to prosecutors requesting certain cases be slow-walked through the system. Recordings of a state police captain providing Governor Ashford with advance warning of federal investigations. For honest officers, it was devastating. Detective James Morrison, who had worked narcotics for 12 years, received the news that his own sergeant was on cartel payroll. They'd worked together since Morrison was a rookie. The betrayal turned his stomach. Captain Lisa Chun of the state police made an appearance on the evening news. With tears streaming down her face, she said simply, "The badge I wore has been soiled by people who swore the same oath I did. We will rebuild this. We will purify this system, or we will burn it down and start from scratch. That is my commitment to the people of Texas." Federal prosecutors moved quickly. The arrests began immediately. Senior Sergeant David Walsh, Deputy Chief Marcus Powell, Judge Richard Somerville, State Legislator Thomas Garrett. The State Attorney General himself, Franklin Hughes, was arrested at his office by FBI agents at 4:15 p.m. on next day. But the most critical arrest came at dawn on next day. Governor Marcus Ashford was taken into custody at his residence in Austin. He was wearing a Navy suit. His face remained composed as federal agents read him his rights. As he was led to a waiting SUV, cameras flashed. The image would flash across every screen in America within minutes. The man who had raised his hand and sworn to protect the state had been orchestrating its dismantling from the inside. As investigators dug deeper into the seized materials, a larger picture emerged. This wasn't isolated to Texas. The network had tentacles reaching across 5 states: Arizona, New Mexico, California, Oklahoma, Louisiana. The operation moved narcotics northward along established corridors. Shipments would leave cartel production facilities in Mexico, cross the border through coordinates that had been prearranged with compromised Border Patrol agents, move through the Texas distribution hub, and then fan out across the continent. The routing was ingenious. Commercial trucking companies, most of them legitimate operations with 1 or 2 drivers on cartel payroll, would move the shipments mixed in with regular cargo. Restaurant supply runs, agricultural equipment, building materials. The CJNG had figured out that complete concealment wasn't necessary. They just needed the people checking the shipments to not look very hard. And because those people included corrupted federal agents, they didn't. The human trafficking networks worked the same way. Migrants would be collected in Mexico, moved through the Texas hub, and then distributed to labor operations across the entire country. Construction sites, agricultural operations, restaurants, food processing facilities. Modern slavery operated in plain sight because the systems designed to stop it had been repurposed to facilitate it. Financial forensics revealed that the network was generating $4.8 billion in annual revenue, all of it being laundered through shell corporations, offshore accounts, and seemingly legitimate businesses. The cartel had become so integrated into the state's economy that removing it would create genuine economic disruption. Investigators found a document in Governor Ashford's personal files. It was titled 10-Year Vision. In it, Ashford had outlined his plan to expand the operation. According to his notes, the cartel infrastructure would be so deeply embedded in the political and economic systems of 5 states that dismantling it would be politically impossible. He had planned to engineer a permanent restructuring of Southwestern America's governance around CJNG interests. This wasn't infiltration of a system. This was the redesign of the system itself. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of Operation Iron Gateway became public. 47 corrupt government and law enforcement officials charged with federal crimes. 247 cartel operatives arrested. Approximately $8.2 billion in cartel assets seized or frozen. 312 trafficking victims identified and provided with victim services. But the human cost was what lingered. Fentanyl overdose deaths in Texas had increased 340% in the 8 years of Ashford's governorship. Over 12,400 people died. Not because the governor didn't know, Because the governor had facilitated it. Because silence and ambition are sometimes more powerful than violence. Entire neighborhoods in Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio had been devastated by drug distribution networks that operated with government protection. Families fractured, communities hollowed out. A generation of young people lost to addiction that had been methodically introduced into their streets by a cartel in partnership with the state's chief executive. The families of the dead had a right to their anger. They had watched their children disappear into addiction, while the system that was supposed to protect them was being weaponized against them. Special Agent David Morrison, the FBI investigator who had coordinated much of the cyber forensics work, gave an interview months later. He was asked what he had learned from Operation Iron Gateway. Power, he said slowly, doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes power works quietly. It moves through silence, through ambition, through the small compromises that good people make until they've compromised everything. Governor Ashford didn't become a cartel operative in one moment. He became one in 1,000 small moments where he chose convenience over principle. And once you start that path, the cartel doesn't need to threaten you. You're already theirs. The conviction of Governor Marcus Ashford came. He was found guilty on 47 federal counts, including drug trafficking conspiracy, money laundering, human trafficking facilitation, and corruption. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Of the 47 corrupt officials, 41 were convicted. 7 cases are still pending. The sentences have ranged from 3 years to 40 years depending on the severity of their collaboration. The state of Texas initiated a complete overhaul of its law enforcement training, recruitment, and oversight protocols. A federal monitor was assigned to oversee state police operations for a minimum of 5 years. New legislation was passed requiring enhanced background checks and financial audits for all government officials. But the real damage, the lives lost, the families destroyed, the communities scarred, that damage is permanent. This is a story about how deep corruption can run, about how systems designed to protect can be repurposed to exploit, about how power doesn't announce itself with guns and violence, but with silence, with small decisions, with the slow normalization of the unacceptable. Operation Iron Gateway was successful in its tactical objectives, but it was a surgical response to a systemic disease. And surgery can remove the tumor, but rebuilding the immune system, that takes far longer. The CJNG cartel still operates. It has shifted its continental headquarters to a different location. The game continued, even if one board was cleared. The 12,400 people who died from fentanyl that flowed through Texas will not return. The 8,400 trafficking victims processed through the network will carry those scars forever. The honest officers who had to confront the reality that their colleagues were criminals, they will work the rest of their careers under that shadow. This story is a warning, not about cartels, though they are real and dangerous. Not about federal law enforcement, though they are necessary. The warning is about what happens when ambition and silence meet power. What happens when systems designed to serve become systems designed to exploit? What happens when the people sworn to protect become the people who prey? In the aftermath of Operation Iron Gateway, the American people were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The line between law enforcement and organized crime is thinner than we want to believe. The institutions we trust can be corrupted. The people we elect can betray us. And sometimes the greatest threat to freedom isn't from outside enemies. It comes from within, wearing the uniform of the state. This has been a dramatized account inspired by real issues of political corruption and cartel infiltration. All characters, specific events, and details have been created as fictional narrative for storytelling purposes. The dangers depicted, cartel expansion, law enforcement corruption, human trafficking, are real issues facing America. But this specific story, Operation Iron Gateway, Governor Marcus Ashford, and these particular circumstances are entirely fictional creations. The point, ultimately, is this: vigilance requires constant attention. Democracy requires citizens who refuse silence. And the cost of complacency is measured in human lives.